Before we get into today's video, because it's quite gear talk heavy, I want to preface this by saying or giving you my personal opinion about this matter. And you might hear some extremes like, oh, it doesn't matter what you shoot with and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to prescribe to any extremes. I'm going to tell you that gear matters exactly as much as you let it. At the end of the day, any camera you pick or any lens that you pick is a tool to get you the pictures that you want to get. Now, sometimes you need a specific tool, and that's fine. But in general, try not to think about it all that much, because I am talking today about a camera that I've owned for over 8 years, and it was already 2 years old when I bought it. And to this day, it produces fantastic images that I'm more than happy to share and use. So at the end of the day, it's not that deep, you know. If you buy a fancier, more expensive camera, it might help make it easier for you to get the pictures that you want, and that's really the point of buying a camera, to get the pictures that you want. So at the end of the day, spending more money or buying a very fancy high-end lens might make your job easier, but it won't take the pictures for you. So if you take that picture on a phone or a point and shoot or a Leica, it's, at the end of the day, a good picture is going to be a good picture. And if you spend all day wondering about why you can't take good pictures because you don't have a good camera, you're never going to take good pictures. You just gotta go out there and shoot the pictures that you want to shoot with whatever you can get your hands on. And to me, that's how much gear matters. And if you get to a point where you're getting good results and you want to upgrade, that's fine too. It's not that it doesn't matter, but it also doesn't matter nearly as much as you think it does. Cool. Let's go into the video. Roll the real intro. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's episode isn't formally a walkabout, so I'm not going to label it as that. However, it's sort of something that I've wanted to do for a while. I don't know if this will take off, but if it's interesting to you, then maybe I'll make more. But today I wanted to talk about some of the cameras that I own, and specifically I wanted to talk about my favorite camera, the Fujifilm X100T, which is this guy right here. And I've owned this camera for almost 8 years now, so it's been in my kit for a long time, and I wanted to talk about it. And I want to tell you about why I chose this camera, the things I like about it, the things that aren't so great about it, and if I had to replace it or upgrade, why I would do so. So this will be sort of useful for people who are looking into these cameras now that they're quite popular. I know the Vs and the 6s are very, very hard to find, and all the older models are very, very overpriced on the used market. So I'm going to break this down into showing you some of my favorite pictures that I've taken with this camera. We might do a little bit of a walkabout, and then I'll talk about the aspects of this camera. So let's jump right into some pictures. A lot of pictures from my first scene, 2017, are taken with this camera, and I'll be sprinkling pictures throughout this video and not just in this section. I could go on and on about how much I love this camera, but for now I'm just going to let the output speak for itself, and then we'll talk about specifics in a bit. And it's not just in very good light. Here's a shot that I'm taking in my apartment of these flowers that are starting to wilt, and it's quite overcast outside, so it's quite dull. So now let's talk about why I chose this camera. Before I picked this up, I was running a Nikon DSLR setup with a Sigma art lens, and the quality was fantastic, don't get me wrong. It's a great camera, I still have it, I use it for my studio work, but it just was too big, heavy, and cumbersome and conspicuous to be able to use all the time. It was quite bad on my back too, to carry that around in my backpack all day when I was traveling, and I was quite young at this time too, so it was just, I don't know, it was just too heavy for me. Maybe I needed to hit the gym. Anyway, I wanted to replace it with something a little more compact and just a little more tactile, and so I looked online and I found the Fuji X100T. I thought initially about waiting a little bit to get it because I thought they would replace it with the newer model, but then I heard it was going to be delayed by a whole year, yada yada yada. I just couldn't wait that long. I ended up picking up the X100T. I wanted to get it in silver, but I'm actually quite glad that I was forced to get the black because it was sold out in silver everywhere, because this is actually quite nice. I really like the color of it. I like that it's more low-key than the silver one. It's less flashy, but definitely still a great looking camera and just great to use. And actually I want to shout out Pablo Strong Vlogs, who inspired the Walkabout channel. He doesn't make these videos as much anymore, but when I started doing research about this camera, I found his channel and he was making these walkabout style POV videos with the X100T, and they were great photography, just overall really good content. I really enjoyed it. So, you know, Pablo Strong, you're an inspiration. I don't know if you'll ever see this, but just wanted to put it out there. So now let's talk about some of the reasons why you would pick any of the cameras in this series. So undoubtedly you've seen so many specs about lots of these, so I'm just going to talk about things that are true for every camera in this series that I really like, and some of the reasons why you might want a newer version and some of the reasons why you might want an older version. So let's start with the overall features of the series. The 23mm focal length, which is a 35 equivalent, is super nice. I prefer it very much to 50, and 27 is nice, you get a little bit wider, but I actually really like 35. It's my personal favorite, so that's a yes from me. The optical viewfinder is a great touch. I think that this is one of the nicest ways to photograph. I think it just feels like you're more a part of the scene. And don't get me wrong, I like EVFs. Electronic viewfinders are great, you get to see exactly what you get, but the OVF just feels nice, and I've been using it a lot more recently, so shout out to the OVF. Physical controls are present in all of them. You get the shutter speed, you get the exposure comp dial, you get the aperture ring, which is nice. You get a nice little flash as well, but if you're using a hood like this that sticks out, you may want to remove it for the flash, just a little heads up. But yeah, overall, pretty great stuff in a nice compact package. It's also a very nice to look at camera, which is good. It's one of those things where it doesn't really matter, but if it helps you, if it inspires you to pick it up and take it out more, then it's a good thing. So if it's a camera that you're more likely to take out, then it's a better camera, right? I also want to take a second to mention the film simulations, because it's something that Fujifilm cameras are known for, and it's something that you see a lot of love for in the community. People are making a lot of their own film recipes and whatnot, and they're great. The ability to bake in these profiles is super nice, and some people have done some really great stuff. But I can tell you that with my two Fuji cameras, the X100T and the X-T20, I personally don't use anything beyond Provia most of the time. I just leave that on the JPEG, because that way I have something that I can show that I think is good enough. But in general, I'm always shooting in RAW plus JPEG, so I'm doing my own adjustments in Lightroom. I never really rely on the film simulations, but they are nice to have. And for someone who's just picking up a camera who doesn't really know how to deal with the files from it and stuff like that, or if you have a particularly hard time dealing with editing colors, it's definitely a great place to start. They're great. They're good for a lot of things, and especially now with people getting more creative with these and the processors getting better and you have way more film simulations. The X100T only has, I think the last one that it got was Classic Chrome, which is super nice, but when you get something a generation above that, I think you'll get Across, and then as you start to get more and more generations, you'll get stuff like Eterna, you'll get the new Classic Negative, and there's another one, I can't remember what it's called. I think it might be called Nostalgic Neg or something like that. They're all great. They look great. I'd be interested to try them, but it's not something that I think you necessarily need to get the newest version of the camera for. But if that's something that you're interested in, of course, make the choice that's best for you. So now let's talk about the parts of this camera that I would change if I could about this specific one. And some of these are addressed in the new ones, so there's that. For one, there's only really one big thing for me that I would change, and then a few other things which are more minor, and one or two of them might even be a little bit my fault. But the first and foremost, the biggest thing for me is that this is not a weather sealed camera. The X100V and onwards, so this V and the 6 are both weather sealed, but every camera before that is not. Now, I have used this in light rain and it works fine, but it would just give me a little bit more peace of mind if I knew that it was weather sealed. So that would really make it a more of a do everything camera where I could just throw it in my bag for a trip and know that it's going to be good no matter what the weather conditions are like. At the moment, I much rather just end up packing my one weather sealed camera instead of any of my other ones, even though it's a bigger and less compact camera. So if this was a weather sealed camera, it would be practically a perfect compact camera. The only other thing about the X100T that I think is worth mentioning, and this might be partially my fault, is the battery life. The battery life is not amazing. I'd say these days I have to have 2 to 3 batteries to be able to get a full day out of it, and I do some things to mitigate the battery usage, but when I first got it, it was pretty good. So there's that. It could be due to age, it could be due to my batteries being old, so I could replace them and see if that's better. But it was also in warmer climates, so I think in the colder climate it definitely does struggle a little bit more. And I think that this design, the X100T, maybe even the F, I'm not sure actually, but you should look into it. But this one has the older batteries, which are slimmer and smaller than the newer ones. So I think the V and the 6 definitely have newer batteries. The F maybe, so they might be bigger. But it's just, that's really the only other drawback for me. But you can get a power bank and charge it remotely, which is good. The newer ones have USB-C. This one has micro USB, so there's that. But overall, like, if it had a bigger battery and it was weather sealed, it'd be perfect. The one part of the X100T that's actually horrible, and I'm being completely critical here, is the video. The video is horrendously bad. It should never be used. I've tried to use it a few times. It's just the sensor readout, I don't know what's going on with it, but the pictures come out so beautifully and the video just looks like it was shot on a potato in comparison. It's quite ridiculous, so I would highly recommend not using it. So if that's something that you're looking for, you might want a newer camera. The video output from the X-T20, which is just one generation newer than the X100T, I think, is way nicer. It's much better, and that's not even a camera that's known for its video capabilities. So I would say if you're looking for video, look for a different X100. I'm not sure if the F has good video, but I know that the V and the 6 definitely do. Then there's the nice to haves. Now this is a 16 megapixel camera, and I think the F is 24, the V is probably 24 or 26, and the 6 is 40 megapixels. So you get a lot more megapixels with the newer ones, which is a good thing, but you might also introduce a little bit more noise. At 16 megapixels, I really don't have any issues with using this camera for general use. I don't get as much croppability as I would at 24 or 40, but do I think it's strictly necessary? No. I think that it's perfectly fine at 16, but I think 24 is probably the sweet spot. 40 feels a little bit like overkill. So if you want 24 megapixels, get the F or the V if you can afford that. But yeah, the 16 is fine. So if you're looking for that, it's great. The other thing that would be nice to have is a screen that flips out. Just even like just angling out over here so you can see from above or below would be great. And I think you can get that in the V and the 6. You can't get that on the F, but it's something that would be nice. I don't think it's strictly necessary again, but definitely if you can get it, it's great. Just makes it a more usable camera. You also get IBIS on the 6. I actually wanted to try one before I made this video, but they're so hard to find that they don't have them in stock even as display models in the camera stores near me, so that's out of the question, and I don't know anyone who owns one. But you know, the IBIS I've heard is good for slow shutter shots, so it's definitely a benefit, but I've never felt that this was too hard to handhold. I get pretty decently handheld shots even at night. It also, I want to say that the T is not a night camera. Like, I don't really shoot it over the 1600. You probably can get 3200 pretty decently on the slightly newer ones, and maybe the newest one might be a little bit worse because of how much more resolution that sensor has, but the newer processors will definitely handle low light better. But I can't say that it's something that I personally have struggled with on this camera. So let's just recap real quick. If you absolutely need to have IBIS or a larger resolution or weather sealing or an articulating screen, you're going to need a newer version of this camera. But if you can live without any of those, the X100T is great. Let's also now talk about some things that are better on this camera than the newer ones, and that's mostly to do with the tactile buttons on the back. I've seen pictures of the newest ones and they do away with all of these. In place, I think there's a joystick that you use to choose your focus point. You can probably program it, but I like the fact that I had these directional buttons. I actually use them quite a lot to change metering modes, white balance. I have the film profiles on there. I don't really mess around with them as much, but it's nice to have access to at a moment's notice. So I like tactile buttons, and I wish that they had kept a few more, but your mileage may vary. That's entirely up to you. That's something that I think is worth mentioning though. And the other primary reason that you might want to get one of the older X100s is price. Now, I know that overall they're quite inflated on the used market right now. If you ask me what a fair price for an X100T is, I'd say somewhere between 500 to 600 Canadian dollars, but I know that you're more likely to find them for 600 to 800, maybe even more, I don't know. But personally, I think that because they're an older camera, they have some drawbacks. They're not necessarily worth that much, but at the end of the day, if you can get a good deal on a camera that you want, I suppose that's your choice to make. So in conclusion, I love this camera. I love using it. It's just a great camera to use. It feels good in the hand. It's quite snappy. And even though this one's a little bit older, it's not really something that has ever really bothered me. But if you were looking at some alternatives, we can discuss. The two obvious choices are the Ricoh GR series. So if you got a GR2 or a GR3, they're more compact and they are nice cameras, and you will get good results out of them. The lens is a little bit wider, and the only thing that keeps me from picking one up as my primary camera is I really like the viewfinder, and the other options are full frame. There's the Leica Q series and the Sony RX1Rs, although I don't think they've released one in a while. The Sony RX1Rs are great cameras, but they're just, bigger. And I just personally have never wanted to get one. I've wanted to get something like a Leica Q, but they're just so expensive that I personally can't justify that. But if you have that kind of money, I'm sure they're fantastic, and I'd very much like to try one day. But for me, I think the X100 series strikes a good balance of value for the features that I'm looking for, but you can't go wrong with any of these options. At this day and age, almost all cameras are great. And so yeah, perfection in cameras is kind of hard to define. Perfection in general is a very subjective concept. You can't really pick out one thing that's going to be the perfect camera for everyone, because if that were the case, maybe we'd have already found it and that's the only camera that would sell. But we have so many brands making so many models that fit everyone's different requirements and niches. So at the end of the day, maybe you'll have a different camera that appeals to you. But for me, the X100T just is such a great package, and it feels so much fun to use that anytime I'm going out the door, it's my first choice, unless I need to shoot video or I need something very specific which I can't get out of it. But in general, if I'm just going to go out to shoot for fun or just shoot some street photography, I'm going to take the X100T. It's a great choice. If you're worried about the focal length, there are some conversion lenses you can buy. They do make it a little bit bigger. I haven't used them, but they're out there. One that makes it, I think, a 28 and one that makes it a 50, and those are good to have. If you get a newer version of the camera with more megapixels on the sensor, you'll get more croppability, so you won't even have to worry about necessarily getting the conversion lens. If you didn't want to, you'd just be able to zoom in with a digital crop. So that's something to think about. And finally, I just want to say, if you've made it through this entire video, thank you for watching. If you like it, please let me know. You can leave a comment or follow me on Instagram and send me a message, like and subscribe. If you are planning on getting this camera, or if you already have one of the cameras that I mentioned in this series or one of the other ones, please let me know how you like it, or if you have thoughts against this camera, you can let me know. I'd love to hear what people are thinking about when they're making their choices and what their choices are for street photography, and whether or not you have this camera and you like it or you dislike it, what you like, what you don't like. I'd love to hear all of it, and send me your pictures if you've taken them with these cameras. I'd love to see them. But yeah, that's it from me, and I'll see you soon with a new walkabout, and maybe more than one because I've got a few in the works already.